Right, Baird. Well, there's a name to be reckoned with. John Logie Baird is generally acknowledged as the inventor of the television. Of course, it's true to say that the TV systems which were used for the majority of the 20th century bore very little relation to that system that Baird invented and which was later rejected in trials by the BBC. Baird was... I'm probably going to get a few bad comments for this, but Baird was a guy who was really a bit out of his depth, I think, in a way. He came up with good ideas, but he had no real way of executing them in any practical way. He just came up with a lot of Heath Robinson stuff, television system that involved developing film very quickly first and a camera that couldn't be moved, and things that involved spinning mechanical discs. Well, I tended to always say he was a bit like Clive Sinclair, really, and I'm probably going to get more hate mail for that. But there was another person who I felt was a bit of an inventor and never capable of realising the sort of good ideas that he had.
I was just talking about the importance of elegance in innovative design.
Oh, as with your black watch?
Oh, yes.
But your watch didn't work properly. Elegance and functionality, no?
That said, Clive Sinclair did in fact write a number of books early on in his career about how to build transistor radios, so perhaps I should cut him some slack there. Anyway, in the same way that the televisions that we used to use, certainly the ones that we use nowadays, bear no relation to the televisions that Baird invented, this set, although it's got the Baird name, bears no relation whatsoever to the company that Baird actually ran. His company didn't last very long, for the reasons that I've already covered, and around the time this radio was built, the Baird company was sold to a company in Britain called Radio Rentals. Now, Radio Rentals, as its name might imply, was a company that rented out radios. And I don't know whether this radio was ever actually rented, because by that time I don't think people did rent radios very much. They more tended to rent the old valve sets and things. But Radio Rentals carried on for a number of years, I think until the 1990s or possibly even 2000s, as a company that rented out mostly televisions. In the early days of colour TVs, they were quite unreliable devices and cost quite a lot of money, and it sort of made more sense to rent it, so if it went wrong you get another one for the same money every month, instead of having a piece of useless junk on your hands that couldn't be fixed or required a monthly repairman visit. I seem to remember one of our Philips ones did that. And I think later on they kept themselves alive, as it were, by branching out into renting video recorders, which was another technology which was quite unreliable to start with and expensive, and again people found it perhaps easier to just rent one. Now this set is from I believe 1961. It's an interesting model because certainly for that era it's got VHF FM band. Only goes up to 100 megahertz, which makes it of limited use in today's world. All right, if you just want to listen to Light, Third and Home, or radios 2, 3 and 4 as they're known nowadays, you'd probably just get Radio 1 as well, because that's around this 98 to 100 area here. But there's quite a few commercial stations that are above that and you wouldn't be able to hear them. But if you're the sort of person who turns their nose up at commercial radio, this might be the thing for you. Now the styling is a bit of a curate's egg, really, I think. It's got a nice shiny veneer cabinet. It's got quite a clean grille here. It doesn't need much cleaning up of that. I'm not sure about these knobs. They look like they came from some RAF set from a Avro Lancaster or something like that. And interestingly enough, they've got this weird side-mounted control for the tone. You'll notice there's no tuning pointer, which could be a sign of pain to come if we have to rethread that. This is a volume control, although most of the word volume is rubbed off, so it's all about me. Also, these switches, the wave change switches, are a bit clunky. Well, they're not clunky. In fact, they're not clunky enough. They're a bit soggy and they don't switch over properly, so that's something I'm going to have a look at. Telescopic aerial missing, which is going to limit the performance on VHF, of course. Looking around the back, it has a socket for external VHF aerial. It has an earphone socket. And this switch here is the on and off switch. Now that's very strange. Why did they do that? Why don't they just put it in the volume control, same as everybody else? Not sure about that. Except that it says, just mention here that this can be used with a Baird mains power unit. Well, I don't have a Baird mains power unit, and therefore I don't have a mains lead. Maybe the sighting of the on-off switch at the back was to facilitate the inclusion of the Baird mains power unit, which in our case we have not got. Anyway, let's have a look inside it. So the back comes off with a couple of screws. It doesn't look like the switch would ever have been in the mains route. It certainly seems to be on the DC side. So anyway, that's not something necessarily to worry about. We're never going to get the mains power unit for it. Oh, somebody has nicely taped the tuning pointer onto the back of this. So actually we have got the tuning pointer. So that's good. We can try and put that back. Maybe the string's in the right place. I can't quite see from here. Yeah, I can see the string, I think. Let me just turn the... You probably can't see this. I can see the string going around when I turn the tuning pointer, so that's good news. It means I don't have to rethread it. Maybe I just have to stick that tuning pointer back on. Battery-wise, it has this weird thing here. Now, I can't... That looks to me like a sort of PP9 thing. But why has it got two other sort of negative terminals or positive terminals there? Maybe it was to facilitate some other type of battery. Doesn't quite say here. Oh, it does have a battery thing here. Alternatively, a Baird mains power unit may be used, but it says at the top, ever ready PP9 or equivalent. Well, we've definitely got an ever ready PP9 or equivalent, so let's get that on and see what happens. Right, the battery's in place. There's a click. I can hear the speaker pop when we do things. Do we get anything? I've got the volume fully up and I can't hear anything at all. It doesn't make any difference to the switches. I think certainly doesn't seem to be working. I think the first thing to do is probably to try just the audio path to make sure the audio path is okay. Hopefully it is. I do notice, looking at this and at the circuit diagram, that we have our old friends, the AF series transistors. So it's almost a given that one or more of those is not being a transistor at the moment. Why is the ferrite rod right down at the bottom here? That's an interesting design. Also, the screw seems to be missing from it, because it should, I think, be connected to that board. As I said, we're going to have to lubricate somehow these switch mechanisms. That'd be a problem as well. I think the first thing there, as I said, is I'll see if I can get on the audio side and see if the audio bit works. Well, I pulled it apart, injected some audio around the volume control here and got absolutely nothing, so the audio bit certainly wasn't working. I then traced the audio through. It did appear on the collector of TR6 but not on TR7, so I've replaced TR7 and we now do have audio coming out of the speaker if I inject it at the volume control. That said, we don't have any reception either on FM or AM, so I think the next thing to do is to try some IF tests and see if we can pick anything up there and see if it's further back than the IF or if it's the front end. Well, after some struggle, I can report that we have some progress in that the AM side is now working. I had to replace rather a lot of things, really.
Speaking to that man who managed to turn his life around, he's going to be...
All our customers in keeping their gambling fun.
Well, they're trying to get rid of. I don't think you've seen pictures of this doll that's knocking around on the internet. It's also on the BBC News website. It's unsettling is the word we've chosen.
Well, a lot of things on Radio 5 are unsettling, but what is settling is that we've managed to get the AM side working again, as you can hear there. And that was a bit of a struggle, I have to say. I did mention, first of all, that we had to fix the audio side because the driver transistor in the audio amplifier had failed, which is quite rare. You don't normally get those germaniums failing, to be honest. The rest of it, of course, is all those horrible old AF transistors. I'd replaced the AM mixer oscillator with a well, it doubles. It's AM mixer oscillator in AM mode, and it's the first IF in FM mode. And replaced that initially with a silicon transistor. It sort of worked, but not for very long. But I think actually that was a different problem. I then replaced that with a sort of new old stock germanium transistor, not an AF11X series, which always have these faults with the tin whiskers and shorting out, but an AF124, and that's been a bit more stable. I've then put replacement transistors in for this one. I put this one in quite early because I realised the IF wasn't getting through properly there. But then what seems to have happened is in between me doing that one and this one, which you can't really see, this one also failed, and that had a definite tin whisker short. It was 30 ohms or so between the emitter and the can. So I've changed that as well. And now you can hear it's got something on AM, not on FM. I've still got no FM. And we have two remaining AF11X transistors here. And I suspect I'm going to have to change both of those. It's very rare to get all of these things to fail in a set, but this is quite old. And one of them only failed while I was working on it. Whether that was due to something I did, I'm not sure, but they are all pretty fragile. The only problem with these ones is if I can turn this over, the solder end of those two transistors, which are the FM first front end and mixer oscillator, are sort of hidden behind this tuning mechanism here. So I'm going to have to, either I can get one of those big holes to go exactly where I need to desolder and be very careful not to burn through the cord, or I'm going to have to take the whole thing apart. Fortunately, it doesn't look a very bad restring for the tuning mechanism on this, but I'd rather not do it all the same. But I'm pretty certain I'm going to have to replace both of those, and hopefully that will restore FM operation. Right, well, we actually do have some FM reception now. Admittedly, it does sound a bit pants because I don't have any tuning mechanism at the moment, because if you remember, I said, well, we're going to have to take the drive cord off for the tuning in order to get at the transistors, and that was indeed the case. We did have to cross that sad bridge. So as a result, it's very difficult to get an accurate positioning of the tuning capacitor. Although, if I get my finger near enough it, I can sort of fine-tune it a little bit. Obviously, we're going to have to put all that back together. There have been a lot of obstacles to getting this radio working. I'm not sure whether it justified the effort, but I suppose anything justifies the effort. You don't want everything to go into the skip, do you? So pessimism in this case about the AF series transistors was indeed justified. I had to change every last one of them. The other thing is, the way the board is designed, in the manual they give you a positioning for the components, but they don't give you a track layout, which is a nuisance because it's quite difficult to keep turning it over and trying to work out where things are, because it's actually quite dense construction. It's quite densely put together for a board of that time. And the other thing is, if you look at these old transistors, this is one of the AF transistors I took out. Autofocus is not our friend here, is it? You'll see that they have very long leads, which is not like modern transistors have very short leads. So in a lot of cases, although it, as I said, it is a very dense construction, the transistor holes are spaced quite a lot apart. And with one of these transistors, it's possible to get that in. But with the newer transistors, you see I've had to put some little bridging bits in to get them across there without touching other components. The other issue with this is that you're in the FM section of the circuit, and the length of leads does have an effect. You can't make them too long, otherwise the thing goes into weird oscillations or doesn't work properly or whatever, because you're talking about 100 megahertz or so here. So lengthening this by, half an inch or whatever can make a big difference. Anyway, it does appear to be working now on all wave bands, which is good. So I now have to go through the pain of taking this front panel off again, so that I can get at the tuning mechanism, reassembling the tuning mechanism. And that's going to be a lot of fun, or at least the cord is intact, it hasn't broken, so that shouldn't be too bad, and I have got the diagram for it. And then once we've done that, we should be able to put the thing back together, and it ought to be a radio again. Oh, good news, the dial cord is back on and seems to be rotating correctly. As usual in the instructions, they're not particularly clear on where the cord goes, but I've got some pictures from beforehand and it's not that difficult to work out on this, unfortunately. The annoying thing is, of course, that they persist, and I don't know why so many of these manuals say this, that you start off with the tuning capacitor at minimum capacitance. How do we know what minimum capacitance is? These encased plastic tuning capacitors, you can't really see where the vanes are. If they're open, it's minimum capacitance. You can't really tell whether they're open or closed. So you have to put it back together, find out which end of the band you're at when you turn it either way. I mean, why don't they just say anti-clockwise, which is what it is, fully anti-clockwise? That would have been the correct thing to put in the manual, not minimum capacitance. Never mind, it's on again and I'm hoping it works. So I haven't put the pointer on yet, but I've got to put all the fixings back on and then we can start looking to see if it still works.
Talk sport, traffic and travel with My Dear, driving down the cost of cooling and heating. My Pro partners earn more when completing first-year service visits. Reroute to mydearuk.co.uk.
In Essex, the M25 is partly blocked anti-clockwise after a collision.
Now, T-Rex, of course, there, but we're playing this because, as you hear later, we've been speaking to a real-life Billy Elliot, Anthony Maydew. He's 14 now.
To help to make a difference and being able to talk to people mainly.
And that's Rebecca Neely, social worker for Norfolk County Council, speaking to our brilliant colleague Kaylee Poacher. We are going to be hearing a brilliant story about a young lad doing his bit to keep our coastline clean in the next 5 or 10 minutes or so.
Fazana Chowdhury, Monday evenings from 7, BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
Well, there we go. We've finally got the Baird 298 working on AM and FM. And it actually sounds okay once it's working on both bands. It's quite good sound quality. Now, it's a very simple output circuit, pretty much what you find in this Mullard book here from the 1960s or 70s. I think it's the 1970s, this edition, but this is it was originally done in the 1960s. This is a sort of Mullard How to Build a Radio book, which they published, and a lot of radio manufacturers basically just took circuits out of this book. And I think that's what they've done for the output stage of this. Wasn't particularly straightforward there because, as I said, I ended up replacing all the AF 11X transistors in the RF sections, and it was all working then. You heard it working on FM. I screwed it all back together, did a lot of messing about, aligning the pointer and things like that. And then, having put it all back together, it didn't work again. There was no sound from it at all. So I took the thing all apart again and found that it was measuring a bit odd around TR8 here. Now, I'd already replaced TR7 in the audio stage, so I was surprised that TR8 then had failed as well. Although when I put it on the meter, having taken it out, it looked okay, but I put another OC81 in and it was fine, and it's now working. So I don't know why this one suddenly went wrong after 50 years. And maybe I discharged a capacitor into it accidentally or something while I was putting it back together. B, I've never known these things to go, to be honest. I've repaired loads of sets with this arrangement of output amplifier in them. But generally, they're quite reliable. And I can't remember ever having to replace one before. Now I've had to replace 2 in this thing. It's not a particularly easy thing to work on, as I said, but it's back together, it's working. One of the things, if I was going to make a lot of use of it, I'd probably replace the telescopic aerial. I did think maybe of putting a F connector socket in here, and you could get one of those screw-on telescopic ones, but it's just the wrong size for that, and I didn't want to start drilling around this wood and damaging the veneer, so if I ever do bother to go further with it, I'll probably look at that. There is, as I said, an external aerial socket around the back, which I've got a couple of wires into a 300 ohm feeder here at the moment. Also, if you remember earlier, we were talking about the mains and power arrangement and the power switch being here at the back instead of in the volume control. Now, I did speculate that might be to do with the mains arrangement, and I think that probably is the case, because I think I might also mention the weird layout of this here, that you've got the normal PP9 connectors for your positive and negative, and then there's two more positive connectors here. And why are they there? But they go to these yellow wires, and these yellow wires are not involved in anything on the rest of the circuit. So it appears that the mains unit went in place of the battery, and it would have had a mains lead going into it, and then it looks like it brought out the mains to these two connectors here, and then from these yellow wires went by the switch. So the switch would be switching both the mains and the DC end. That seems to me to be a bit iffy, putting full mains through these sort of battery connectors. Also, of course, when you take the back off, if it's got the mains in, then you've got to put your fingers all over some live mains, which is a bit nasty, really.
The result is death.
To be fair, they do put a note on the back saying, warning, when the mains unit is in, don't take the back off. And in most regulations it does say, you know, if you have to dismantle the thing to see a live terminal, that's still valid, because you shouldn't be dismantling it. Except that dismantling this set is a normal operation, so I would argue that doesn't apply here, because you have to dismantle it to put a battery in. It was different times. People didn't care as much about health and safety in those days as they do now. Anyway, there we go. Oh, one more struggle I have to tell you about is this, and I'm going to have to be very careful here. This is a battery I just took out, isn't it? Let's put that over there. This battery was the one I put in initially, and it seemed to get, I got it working on AM, and then when I was looking at FM, I was getting all sorts of weird voltages, and I couldn't work out why this was the case. You know, it's one of those things where they say, look, this thing isn't obeying Ohm's law. It just doesn't make sense. And then I measured across the battery, and it was 9.2 volts or something like that, which is okay, it's what you'd expect. I then put the load, you know, plugged it in, switched it on, measured across the battery again, it was down to about 7.5. I thought I must be drawing a hell of a lot of current then to get down that low. Put the ammeter side of it, of the fluke in, and it was only drawing about 15 milliamps. That's not enough to drop 1.5 volts, is it? The battery seems to have incredibly high internal resistance, so you don't have to put much load across this battery before it just stops working as a battery. And it works for some things but not others. Obviously the FM section was a little bit more demanding. Several times over the last few days, I mean, this is 15 to 20 minutes of video which has dragged on for over a week, and several times over the last few days I thought about chucking this thing in the skip. Obviously we do need to chuck this thing in the bin right now because it is a waste of space. So there we have it, the Baird M298. Does it live up to the great man's name? In the sense that a lot of the stuff he did was quite impractical? Yes, I think it does. In the sense that it sounds pretty good? I don't know, really. I wasn't around in the time that Baird was around. All I can say is if I see another Baird radio for sale, I'm going to give it a wide, wide berth. See you on the next one.